Hello everyone and welcome to our session on hybrid demand in corporate real estate, the future of property management. For those of you that don't know me, and that's probably most of you in this audience, my name's Emma Parry. I'm a professor of human resource management and head of the Changing World of Work group at Cranfield School of Management in the UK. And really most of my work and most of my interests focus on how the changing world of work is affecting what we do in organisations and how we manage people. And as you can probably imagine, over the last 2 or 3 years, I've spent a lot of time working with organisations thinking about changing ways of working, and particularly this move to remote or hybrid working and what that means for both organisations and for employees. I'm really excited to be here today because this is a slightly different perspective for me on this issue and this challenge, because most of my work focuses on employee outcomes such as well-being or employee commitment, or on organisational outcomes. And we are going to talk a little bit about that today. But of course, really what we're going to focus on in this session, as well as the people issues, is we're going to focus much more on the issues on office space and real estate and the implications of this move to hybrid working on real estate. We have some fantastic panellists today. I'm not going to do that thing that people do at conferences where I read from a piece of paper and introducing them. I'm going to let them introduce themselves. So let me do a bit of a round robin here and ask people to introduce themselves. Despina, can I start with you and ask you to introduce yourself, please?
Yes, thank you, Emma. Great to be here with you today. I'm Despina Katsikakis. I'm Global Head of Total Workplace at Cushman and Wakefield, and I have been working in workplace transformation for over 35 years with global occupiers and with landlords as well.
Brilliant, thank you, Despina. Rory.
Cheers, Emma. Yeah, again, delighted to be here. So I'm Rory Murphy. I'm the commercial director for VINCI Facilities. VINCI Facilities is the facilities management arm of VINCI Construction in the UK. So my perspective, I suppose, is that we look after a number of public and private sector customers, not just in the office sector, but across all sectors. And also I've done a lot of work with the RICS over the last 10 to 12 years around sort of the importance of FM in the built environment.
Brilliant, thank you, Rory. And last but definitely not least, Chantal.
Thanks, Emma. Thanks all. Good morning, everyone. I work with Heidrick and Struggles. I'm a partner in the business. Heidrick is an executive search firm, talent provider, and assessor. We also do a lot of work with organisations around culture. For my part within Heidrick, I lead our real estate business within EMEA. I also sit within our board practice, and I also sit within our diversity, equity and inclusion practice for UK, Europe and Africa.
Fantastic. And I'm sure those of you that are listening in will agree, we've really got a number of different perspectives on this issue today. So I'm really interested to see what people have got to say. So what we are going to do for the next few minutes, next 40 minutes, I think, roughly now, is I have a few questions that I'm going to ask of the panel, but we would also like you in the audience to ask your questions, of course, and I will work through those either as they come up, if that works at the time, or at the end. We will allow some time at the end for questions. So just a reminder for you, please do let us have your questions so that we can make sure that we tailor this session to what you're interested in. Right then, so let me ask all of the panel the same question here. So obviously we're returning to a little bit of normality. This year certainly feels more like normality to me, I think, than previous years even, after the pandemic, touch wood. But in your experience, how successfully are workplaces adapting to this change, to this move to what seems to be a new norm around hybrid working? Who wants to start us off? Despina, do you want to start us off?
Sure, happy to. So I think it's a really interesting way of asking the question, because we talk about how our workplaces are adapting. But I think what's really interesting for me is how are clients adapting? And the organizations we work with tend to be at different levels of development. Many of them used flexible working pre-pandemic. So what is happening at the moment is all of our clients, I would say across the board, are still experimenting, testing different scenarios, trying to recognize how they can move away from a single answer to actually implement a much more iterative and dynamic process to ensure that real estate is adaptable to support the dynamics of their business. So I think the biggest issue that we're seeing is a recognition that there's a critical need for cross-functional alignment to change behaviors and beliefs of management, leverage new technology tools to work in different ways to leverage time and place. And I think that will lead to completely different workplace typologies and provide more integrated experiences. So we're right in that middle part of that journey at the moment, Emma.
Yeah, fantastic. And I would agree that companies are still experimenting. Anyone that says they've got this made is not telling the truth, in my opinion. Chantal, do you want to carry on from those ideas?
Yeah, listen, absolutely. I totally agree, Despina, right? We're in a period of reinvention. We've all had those conversations with clients, with people generally. I mean, we don't have to tag them with a name, right? We don't have to bracket who they are. Everybody, without fail, I think, that I've spoken to over the last almost 3 years has been reassessing their lives, their careers, their relationships to their employers, how they want to live. And this has been going on pre-pandemic. There was a movement, there was a feeling, there was almost an enlightenment around this prior to the pandemic, and now it's forced. And so how successful are we? Where are we in that point on the graph? I don't know exactly, probably right in the middle, maybe right at the beginning, who knows? It's still really early. So it's reinvention. And I think it genuinely, and this is my opinion rather than Heidrick's, but I think genuinely, I see 2, 3, 4, 5 years still of settling, of grounding. I still feel very, very sort of fluid. And I think probably these 2 years of recession aren't necessarily going to help with that settling either. Rory, what's your take?
Yeah, I think there's the expectations of employees has changed drastically, I think, through COVID and coming out the other side in terms of what people might expect from the flexibility they might expect, how their employer might treat them, the sort of workplace that they come into. But I think I'd agree also that we're in such a period. I'm not sure we have settled into any normality, because now I suppose in the UK we've around Europe as well, in terms of the whole energy crisis or the cost of living crisis. Actually, there's external factors that are encouraging people to come back to work. People might not want to work from home. They might need to come to work because it's a cheaper environment for them. So I think I'm not sure I'd absolutely agree. We're not through the curve at all at the moment. I think we're in a position where we as an employer and working for external organisations, they're all finding their way, and different roles require different requirements, and different individuals require different facilities. It's very, there isn't one size fits all in terms of a sort of workplace solution for people. So I'd absolutely agree. I think within all the sectors we work, there is a very different approach, and we do have to understand that not all sectors, which I always like to reinforce on here, that not all sectors have the luxury of working from home or delivering. So if you're in the educational sector, the health sector, the manufacturing sector, we mustn't pretend that this conversation about hybrid working covers every employee in every sector, because it absolutely doesn't. There are plenty of sectors where people do have to go to work and they have no option. So I think it's a developing theme. But being here in the centre of London today, again, I can certainly vouch for the fact that it's way busier coming into London in the last 3 or 4 months than it has been since COVID, undoubtedly.
Yeah, I mean, and I think that's really important. I mean, actually, it's a minority of organisations or employees that can work at home, because it's about 40%, I think, that are in jobs that, where they can work at home for any or some of the time at the moment. So it's, we talk about it as though this is a phenomenon that affects everyone, but of course that's not you know, that's not the case. And even during the
absolutely.
pandemic, you know, it was still not the case. So, so that's the thing. So if we focus, you know, a little bit, I guess, on this change, Chantal, coming to you, and let's focus on some of the people issues for a moment. Do you think we're seeing a genuine change in mindset from the organisational perspective towards remote working or working at home? Or do you think we're likely to see a move back over time?
We could make the session just about that question, can't we, almost? Okay, so we've seen a lot of contradictory responses and reactions to the working from home movement, those that can, to Rory's point, right? So we're talking about the cohort that is a possibility for here. We at Heidrick strongly believe the hybrid model is the future of work, full stop. But for leaders, it's the most challenging of all possibilities to navigate. And getting the hybrid model right really requires pausing and thinking about actually those gains that we've had in the last few years, rather than trying to almost recreate the past. You know, when we talk about the past, I'm not sure that's viable any longer. So therefore, leaders need to be more agile. Leaders need to be more thoughtful. They need to address inclusion. They need to address communication. They need to address career development, productivity, innovation. Has that mindset been fully embraced by all organizations? No. It's to this point again, where are we on the journey? Where are we in this reinvention, this transformation? I think we're still very much finding our way. And I genuinely, not to again too much, but I genuinely think that it's going to take a number of years, and I'm not sure that the 1-2 year recession that we're now going to go in is going to help. But what we do know is, if we look at facts, we know that about 2/3 of the workers that can work from home enjoy and prefer having some flexibility. So rigidity around what that means probably doesn't work either, right? So the pendulum swings sometimes one way or the other, or left and right too much. So flexibility and trusting the employees, those organizations that have done that well are further up the curve, and they've seen an increase in productivity. There have been some extraordinary financial results that have come out of the last 2 years. Then when I think about, because Emma, obviously you're asking about people, when I think about people and the conversations I'm having with people who, as I've said at the beginning of this, are reassessing their lives, flexibility as part of that dialogue, as part of that offer of employment, is vital. And we have seen in the early parts of the pandemic, for example, employees refuse and turn down job offers because that flexibility wasn't there. So the people, if we can differentiate slightly, individuals have definitely moved forward, some faster than others, and organizations as a cohort are grappling with the complexity. And some of this has, geographical overlay, political overlay, cultural overlay. I mean, there are so many different lenses you can apply to that cohort that make it harder for the cohort to move as quickly as the individual from a mindset perspective. But we are seeing change. We genuinely are. Yeah. And it's early in the adoption phase.
Yeah, and I love what you say there, Chantal, about flexibility. When I talk to organisations, often they're trying to do this, but in a really rigid way. So you can work at home on Monday and Friday. Well, and I always, when I work with organisations, I always say, forget about hybrid working. Actually, this is about choice and control. Individuals want choice and control over how they're working, flexibility. So it's not about the pattern, it's about allowing them to choose, actually. What
actually, I love that, Emma. I love that, actually. I think that's right. I just love the words, the simplicity of the words there too that you've just used. I think that's absolutely nail on the head.
So it's interesting you're using choice and control, because I might throw some data into this, Emma, if that's all right, because I think Chantal set it up perfectly. And we've been collecting data through our experience per square foot tool from pre-pandemic and every year since across 185,000 people in our clients. So we have over 10 million data points. They're telling us something really, really interesting. This issue of choice and control, 94% of the participants of our surveys want to have choice of how they spend their time. So flexible hours, right? Flexibility of schedule. And over 79% want to have choice of where they work. Now, what's really interesting is organizations that are giving people flexibility of when they work, those individuals have a 40% better experience and a 35% higher engagement at their job. So you can begin to see that this is no longer, a choice, to use that word again, for employers. It is absolutely critical that choice is here to stay, because it just makes such a significant impact on all of the aspects of productivity, engagement, and Chantal made the point about people choosing to take on a role because they are given that flexibility.
Yeah, some really striking figures there, Despina. Thank you for that.
Have we become a bit me-centric though, Emma? I think one of the issues I think is that I think employees, and maybe the recession that Chantal is touching upon might help this, is that I think there's been a shift to some degree. This isn't a generalization, around people's expectations, and even those conversations there, it's all about me as the employee, whereas there is an element of trust from the employer. I think, and that's where I think we're still settling down. I think organisations always trusted their staff. I'm sure all the best organisations did, but there is there's much more of an undertone, I think, at the moment, to say, well, actually, what can you do for me in terms of what I'd like this or I'd like that. You do have to, as an employee, you do have to, that dial has to move to a point of balance between the flexibility that some people may enjoy in their job and the reward that gives them and the engagement, versus the delivery obligations of the organisation they're working in. And I think that's the sort of silent battle that is going on, and trying to get yourself into a position where that works. Now, in industries where there is a excess demand and not enough skills, then the employee will clearly have the sort of upper hand. But as that becomes less an issue, I think we will settle maybe on a flexible working, hybrid working approach, which is both people centric and organisation centric. I think that's where I think we will end up.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think it's about setting some structure about what's possible, set some boundaries, and then allowing people choice and control within that. And then you can adjust that, adjust that tension. It's interesting. I read it. There was a headline. I don't know if any of you saw it a couple of weeks ago or a few weeks ago in one of the papers that said organisations are winning the war over getting people back to the office. And I thought the way that was presented as this war between was not very helpful, but also, I guess, a good illustration of how this is often.
It's all binary. That's the problem. The discourse is all binary, and the solution is not binary. It's complex. And I think that's the biggest problem. The headlines have always been, in the office or at home. It's not one or the other. It's both, right? And that's what's making this such a more prolonged journey for organizations to undertake.
Brilliant. So I'm going to come back to Chantal. Let's just stay on the people side very briefly, and then I do want to move on to the real estate office side of this. That's really why we're here, I guess. Chantal, you talked about some of the complexities that people were working with. When I talk to senior leaders within organisations or HR directors, the question I get asked more than anything is about culture. And how do we manage our culture? I can see your face that's a big question, and I apologise for that. But, you know, I mean, I get asked, you know, well, how do we manage our culture now we're not in the office? I mean, my answer is normally, well, how did you do it before? And they say, well, we didn't, which always makes me smile. But, you know, but I mean, can you just talk a little bit about, you know, this move to hybrid working? What does that mean for culture in organisations, and how can organisations really manage this moving forward? I know it's a big question, but.
Yeah, look, that's all right. I came with a few ideas on how to try to start the discussion. I'm not sure it concludes. Look, I sort of gave some hints at the beginning. Around inclusion, communication, career development, productivity, innovation. If we were to sort of link off of some of those as slight headings, let's say, you know, there have been feelings around individuals that are working from home, burnt out, managers not knowing that, long hours, some feeling really lucky that they're allowed to work from home, others feeling as though maybe there's missed water cooler moments, missed opportunities because workforces aren't there. We've all heard these anecdotes, we've all heard these stories, we've all reflected on some of these things, and there's truth in all of them. To Despina's point, it's complex. It isn't one or the other, it's a melange of everything. What was interesting, some of our research, I remember reading the shift from I work for Heidrick to how well does Heidrick work for me? And Rory, I hear your point around that sort of selfishness and the I being very strongly focused in the last few years versus the organisation. But most companies are struggling with this. They genuinely are, as people are reassessing. And I think engaging with workers is key, but it's going to be, and whilst we're real estate, and I do believe that the real estate that people sit in is relevant, it's going to be more than trophy offices or innovative spaces and providing snacks and meals. I genuinely believe that diversity, equity, and inclusion are where some of the wins are going to be for culture. Expanded opportunities for career, learning online, changing the way that you teach and coach, ensuring leaders and managers are skilled with this flexible working, how to read cues, how to communicate virtually, how to communicate online, how to not leave appraisals as a one-year assessment, which you would get together in the office over coffee for, but check in with people more frequently. What some of those things do is perhaps close what we've done some research into, which is the purpose gap. So upper echelons in organizations, if I can use that crass term, upper leaders, boards, 85% of those that we have surveyed over the last year, so a few hundred different executives, feel really aligned to the purpose of their organization. But middle management and below absolutely don't, and very strongly so. So there's a real difference in terms of who you're talking to when they feel aligned to the business, their job, the culture of the organization. So when it comes to how do you maintain a positive culture, you do have to think about the different audiences within your business. You do have to think about, career progression for millennials or Gen Zs and those that are wanting to come into the office but maybe don't see their bosses frequently, might be different to middle management tier, or particularly to a female who might be feeling that she's missed, but actually life has taken on a different stance for her, and she's able to juggle her family and personal life more easily. And I'm making some judgments there that females have children and all those other things, but forgive me the stereotype. As such, chief executive has to make culture their number one priority, and not as it has always been, if it's been addressed, for financial performance only. That inclusivity point has to be very visibly driven through the organization at all levels, and the organization has to be part of its DNA. And that's where culture is going to stem from. So to create a positive culture where everybody feels included and productivity remains high and you keep your talent, it is about everybody playing their part in the organization, but particularly your CEO being one that is very focused and understands the crucial link between performance, culture, and inclusivity.
Brilliant, Chantal. And I'm glad you mentioned productivity then, because before we move on to talk about real estate, I have a quick question for you, or maybe for Despina, as she brought in the figures, I think, about related to some of this. So Paul in the audience has asked a bit of a challenge, I guess, on some of the productivity improvements that we mentioned earlier. He says, as a residential surveyor, I have on and off been working from home for the last 20 years. While there are some efficiencies, I would question whether productivity and creativity is increased due to lack of interaction with colleagues. Despina, you talked about these improvements, I think. Do you have a back for that before we move on?
Yeah, so interesting, because he mentioned a couple of points in there. So let's take them apart. So we measure productivity in terms of two dimensions: your ability to do individual focused work and planned collaboration. It's very interesting to note that productivity figures in our data set have remained absolutely stable in terms of those two dimensions. Pre-pandemic, 2020, 2021, 2022, completely the same numbers. Your ability to connect and brainstorm and do creative thinking with others, however, dropped significantly, not surprisingly, in 2020. That has started coming back up again. Your ability to then connect with colleagues in terms of cultural connection, which is what Chantal was talking about, has also dropped. We saw this phase where we tend to have been describing it as digital equality through 2020, where everyone was able to have a say at the same level through technology. So intentionality of how you use space, time, and tools is going to be the critical piece in this, because intentionally coming to a place to collaborate meaningfully, to connect meaningfully with colleagues, to brainstorm, to do creative thinking, and also using technology tools to leverage asynchronous and synchronous collaboration differently is what will make the difference. So I think purpose and intentionality are going to be the critical elements in terms of both behavior and place to support productivity and well-being and effective hybrid.
Okay, brilliant. And just to give us some context here before Rory, I'm going to come to you in just a second to talk a bit more about office space, so we can move a bit more towards real estate. But we do have the results of the poll that was put out at the beginning of this session, which I think give us some nice context as to where our audience is actually. So the poll states our current work policy allows 50% of our audience said hybrid working. 20% said it allowed people to work at home 5 days a week, so all of the time, and 30% said office only. So I think it may be quite a nice, actually a nice indication of the journey that we were talking about earlier then, that actually we do still have a real mix in terms of how people are working. I would be interested to know if that 20% that are working completely remotely were always remote only, or if that's a if that's a change, if anybody wants to tell me that in the chat, you know, in the Q&A. Right then, Rory, let's talk about real estate a bit more, shall we? So
yep.
Obviously, one of the implications of people working in a different way is in the way that we design offices and in our use of office space. Are you seeing people begin to think about that differently?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, there's been a real change across various sectors in terms of how people have treated the office space, and I mean, there's interesting research by people like Leisman around the whole experience of work and attracting people back into the office on the basis that people have got very used to working at home. I think they sort of describe it as a hotelification of offices, but people have got very used to having everything they need around them at home, and so therefore, when and if they're encouraged back to the office, just in terms of their working environment, they want to have everything relatively accessible. What we have seen is, and it's been of mixed success in terms of reinventing the workplace, but with lots of collaborative areas, lots of meeting space, lots of improvements to the facilities in terms of catering and the ability to make tea, coffee, and those those sort of stations. But that hasn't necessarily always transmitted itself into attracting people back into the workplace. And I think that probably goes to some of the points that both Chantal and Despina have talked about, because it's not just about creating the space. And I think what's also happened is that whilst we have that space, if people aren't collectively coming back together, I've seen plenty of examples where you'll go to a floor plate that has been fabulously remodernised and reinvented in terms of green walls and fabulous meeting spaces, and there's 10 people in there working on their headsets doing team calls with their colleagues, because it's insanity. So that there is a link between, you can create the environment, and I think certainly the surveys that Leisman and others have done have said that there's an experience issue that people want to have. And also I think people have worked from home for so long that they see that it's not a cost of living crisis, it's a cost of working. So how much does it cost me to get into the office? Why do I want to go? Why do I want to get on the train? So you do have to create workspaces that are one, provide all the things that might be provided at home, but also do the things that both Despina and Chantal have talked about in terms of culturally bringing people together. So a long answer to a short question, but yes, we've seen a lot of that workplace change and modernisation, but it hasn't always resulted in everybody coming back, because that is a cultural thing. And I think you do need to work on the basis that I think the most successful places is where people have been encouraged to come back on similar days or working days, because there's nothing worse than having a Teams meeting with 5 people in the office and 5 people off it. That just doesn't work. So I think there's a whole way in which we work, the way we manage our diaries, the types of events that are together and the types of events that are apart, that mean whilst the workplace can attract people back, there are some cultural and organisational aspects that have to be confronted. Otherwise, you can create the greatest space in the world, but people aren't going to come. So I think we are definitely seeing a change in the use and design of office space. That doesn't always result in everybody coming back. So
brilliant. That's really helpful. Thanks, Rory. I mean, if perhaps I can pass that on to Despina a little bit, because you talked about experience and experience being important. I mean, is your experience, Despina, and maybe Rory has a view on this as well, that people are taking a more people-centric approach to their buildings and thinking a bit more about this experience?
Absolutely. I think that as we acknowledge that work will no longer take place in a single location, and we will be leveraging an ecosystem of virtual and physical places for work, that means that the office will need to become an inspiring destination for people. And at the moment we say that obviously is all around those issues of the priority of people coming in are about connecting with others, collaborating, exchanging knowledge, but also being inspired. And when we look at the underlying driver of engagement, of employee experience in the workplace, inspiration is one of the critical elements that drives that engagement. And we are without question seeing that occupiers are increasingly focused on quality of providing spaces that make employees want to come to the office, and in some cases are willing to take less space and actually invest in savings in buildings that have greater amenities, greater curation, greater experiences, and pay higher rents for that. So we're seeing that really actively having an impact in the quality of spaces that occupiers are investing in. And you mentioned the areas of well-being in the beginning. Those were seen as nice to have pre-pandemic. They are absolutely basic expectations: quality of air, biophilic design, wellness certification, community engagement to help the occupier deliver some of the S and ESG targets that they're trying to do. So all of those elements, that hospitality focus will be critical.
Yeah, I'd agree with that from a facilities management perspective. There's some of the hygiene factors that I mean, the non-sexy end of this discussion around reimagining the workplace, but it's the hygiene factors. If you work remotely and at home and then come into an office, there are issues with noise. There are issues with the ability to go and make yourself a cup of coffee. The flexibility in itself of being at home and the way you design and operate your own workstation. For those periods of time that you're in the office and working alone, that you almost resent the fact that you haven't got that flexibility. I think it's different if you're coming in to do collaborative events, and as we talked about, water cooler moments and the catch up with people. I think that's absolutely key. But there are those hygiene factors related to it. Does this office serve a purpose that means I can be my most productive when I'm at work? And I think some of those are not about the very sharp end of design, but are very much around the hygiene factors that relate to your ability to do the best you can.
Excellent, thank you. So going back to Despina, I think, I'm afraid, sorry, you're making you busy here, Despina. I mean, what we're talking, but we seem to be hinting here that expectations around buildings are changing. I mean, is that true in terms of occupiers of buildings? And also, how important, to bring it back around to people a bit again, how important is having these grade A offices in attracting and retaining talent? Or do you think actually it's become more about working at home, so it's less important?
So again, let's look at the figures. So the premium for new construction office space that incorporates amenities and services has nearly doubled during the pandemic, from about 21% to 39%. We expect that there will be a potential bifurcation of grade A space into two tiers of super high quality space, which will attract very high rentals and quality occupiers, because it has become such a critical issue for occupiers to create destinations. So really the landlords that are actually, building owners that are focusing on creating spaces and places that where employees want to be, are the ones that will be winning through in the long term. And we will see this play out on also a bigger level, not just the building itself, but the surrounding area. So we've analyzed cell phone data that shows that employees are actually far more attracted to vibrant neighborhoods that have restaurants, cafes, experiential retail, and those areas have recovered 3 times faster in terms of people coming back than non-vibrant neighborhoods in exactly the same cities. So both at the level of the building and at the level of the overall community, we will see that be a critical factor in investment and rental values going forward.
I think that's really interesting. It's almost a catch-22, because of course, if people don't come back in the office, some of those businesses that create that vibrant community will struggle. So
right.
it's a bit chicken and egg, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think it's a kind of, I think it's really interesting because we've talked a lot throughout the pandemic about convenience, right? The ability of blurring work, live, play. So, areas, you look at King's Cross development in London, areas which bring together those different layers of functionality and create more complex layered places will ultimately do better.
Excellent.
Yeah, I think that's a crucial point. I think it's a crucial point that people's perception of working will be the minute they leave their house to the minute they return. So I think that the community feel, the commute, the ease of getting into the office, or the workplace generally, are all factors, as well as the destination. I think people view, in this discussion we're having here, I think people view work to be, well, now I am leaving home to go to work. So from the minute I leave to the minute I get back, all of that is related to work. Now, if that's easier and more enjoyable when you're there, as well as the office environment, then that all counters into this discussion, definitely.
I think it's hard not to sort of jump in on and what everyone's saying, because it's such a passionate topic. I think we have to remember, don't we, that Gen Z and millennials, sort of 80% of those, certainly that many surveyed, including Deloitte, disconnected during the pandemic, and even now.
If we lost, there we go.
Am I back?
Lost you for a second then, but you're back.
Okay, good.
You're back.
I think we also had to remember that human beings, even the most introverted, like company. We don't want to sit in our houses
Exactly. Yeah.
all of the time alone.
It's fascinating. I think that a few years ago, in kind of the consumer world, we started talking about whole holistic experiences and creating holistic experiences for customers, and now we're having very similar conversations in terms of work, which I think is really important.
Well, Emma, this is a really great point, because I think as an industry we can learn a lot from the retail sector, right? Creating inspiring destinations was very much the challenge for retail, and it has become exactly the same issue for offices.
Okay, I suddenly have lots of questions, which always happens when you have just a few minutes left, doesn't it? So which if I look slightly distracted there, it's because my multitasking failed slightly, because there were so many of them. My apologies. Okay, so a question for the real estate people. Okay. A question about managers are often keen not to have empty offices until they get a chance to transform their portfolio. Collaborations or partnerships in use of space can help in relation to illiquidity. But do the panel have any thoughts about how to reduce illiquidity? Sorry, you can tell that's not my area of expertise there.
I'm not quite sure what the question is asking, I have to say. It felt like a multi-layered question, but maybe we can kind of think about.
Talking about shared space or getting others into work in the space you're in. I think there are examples of office developments that are based on that.
We just did a big study with WeWork, actually, to look at the role that Flex has to play. And we looked across London, New York, and Singapore. And we basically concluded that Flex is a critical component of creating, enabling flexibility for occupiers to flex up and down as they begin to recalibrate their portfolio, because it provides the same level of experience as core business space and allows the same kind of conditions to take place. So that's definitely one lever to use to drive greater efficiency and reduce underutilization. But I do want to make the point that underutilization of office space was well in place pre-pandemic. Offices, on average, were used 50% of the working day.
Yeah.
It's just that the pandemic has made it obvious that we can indeed work remotely. So it's not a new phenomenon.
Brilliant. Okay, I am aware of time, so I am going to wrap up there. So my apologies to those of you whose questions we haven't managed to answer. I am just going to leave you with one comment that made me smile, if you saw me smile at a strange point then, which I'm not going to ask you to answer the question, but I do love this point, which is, I wonder if pet-friendly workspaces have increased because my cat is now very used to being a co-worker. I love that as a thought for use of, changing office space and the experience moving forward.
Everyone's got a dog now.
Exactly. So leaving you with that thought, I am just going to say a massive thank you to Rory, Despina and Chantal. Thank you for your insights. I'm sorry we didn't have more time to answer the additional questions and to get your insights. I found that fascinating. And thank you to everyone for joining us. I hope you enjoy the rest of the conference.